It's the Health in the Real World podcast. It's time to start the show with Chris Janke as your host. Here to give you everything that you need when it comes to fitness strategies. We keep it simple and easy. It's your roadmap to get healthy. You don't need equipment and you don't need a gym. Just the right strategies to get you fit and trim.
The Health in the Real World podcast is sponsored by...
When I was just 14 years old, I threw out my back. When I was 24 years old, I began to learn about simple, gentle exercises and stretches that could systematically restore movement when your back pain is being caused by sedentary lifestyle. 4 workouts to ease muscle tension and develop core strength. Workout number 1 is the easiest. Workout number 4 is the hardest. You systematically progress yourself through this. This book has been amazing for so many people. I've gotten so much feedback about it, about how it has literally just changed people's lives. This is the book to get. Check it out. It's on Amazon. Help, I threw out my back. Hello and welcome to Health in the Real World. I'm Chris Janke, joined today by Sarah Rose Bright. Sarah is a sex and intimacy coach, founder of the Sexy Life podcast, and the creator of Intimate Sexuality. Sarah is on a mission to help women and couples to love and celebrate their sexuality, create happy and healthy, intimate relationships, and find their pleasure, playfulness, and passion in life. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
You're absolutely welcome. So how did you get into this? How did this start? And then tell us a little bit about what you do and how you help people.
Well, it certainly wasn't something that was discussed at the careers meetings at school.
Right, I would imagine.
Doing this role. And like many people, I got into this work because I had my own challenges. I'd had quite a traumatic relationship in my teenage years, which left me with very low self-esteem, loathing of my body, and very nervous about sex. I didn't know what I wanted, didn't know how to ask. And I just knew it was something that I had to address. And so I faced my biggest fear. And here I am 20 years later doing this as a full-time job. So, yeah.
So this was it. You were a teenager when this happened.
Yeah, teenager. So I was
Wow.
just in a very emotionally abusive relationship, which just left my self-esteem in tatters. I turned to drugs and alcohol in my sort of early 20s. And it was actually becoming a young mum that was the catalyst for my wake up with this, and knowing I had to sort myself out and do something about it. But 20 years ago when I was doing this, it's we've got a huge growth in sex coaches, teachers, intimacy teachers, courses. There was very little around 20 years ago.
Right.
You literally had to go and hunt for it. But I was just on a mission. I just knew it was a place that I needed to go, and I knew I needed to sort it. And I knew it wasn't something a doctor could help with, and I didn't want a therapist, didn't seem like the right route. So I just sought out my own healing and managed to find some places where I could do that. And yeah, here I am 20 years later.
So what did 20 years ago, what did you have to do, since there weren't that many resources? Where did you have to go, and how did you sort of piece that together?
Yeah, well, I was actually in a bookshop looking for something, and I found a book on Tantra. And through that book and looking on the internet, I found a women's group that was meeting up the road. And that's where I went because it felt a safe place to go as part of my healing. And so I just started helping. There was a women's group that looked at sexuality and intimacy, and I just started going to that. And then I ended up coming to America, all over the world, trying to find the best training and teaching. So it was a real mission, but it just changed my life on every single level. And it's just now my passion to help other people, because when people are stuck in this area of their life, it affects everything.
Yeah, it does. You work predominantly with women or men also, couples?
Women and couples. I worked with men for a number of years, and I love working with everybody. But it was just about niching down, and I then focused on women. But women was just bringing their partners, and so it's just meant that working with couples as well. So I love working with everyone.
So what do you find is what does somebody initially call you for? Like what are the, I don't know, the symptoms, or what do they want to work on?
So often it can be for couples one of the partners doesn't want to have sex or isn't feeling any desire, or there can be a mismatch in desire. So one would define themselves as experiencing lower desire than the other. There's always a mismatch. So one of the first things I do is normalize that. It can also be a lot with couples around communication. We don't have a vocabulary for how to talk about this and how to create a great sex life. And so often for couples, it's an awkward area. One or both parties can feel uncomfortable talking about it. And then for the women I work with, again, low desire can be a really common theme. But also what I see generally is a lack of sexual confidence, because there's no education in this part of people's lives. So you've got the typical reasons people can come for, like, they're not having an orgasm, or a man might be ejaculating quicker than he'd like. But I just see a whole load of people that actually the biggest thing is lacking in sexual confidence and performing to a sort of sexual script. They think this is how sex should look, that it is goal-based. And when it's sort of what I call goal-based sex, where sex is always about heading towards orgasms, while that can be pleasurable, it can also be really limiting. And that's when people come to me saying sex is boring, it's functional, it's routine. And it's about often unlearning how they've learned to do sex to really access their natural erotic pleasure and blueprint.
Yeah, more about, that's interesting. The goal, what do you call it? Goal-based. It's, I would imagine that could get very like mundane and like, okay, here, let's just get through this to get to the right. It's not like present. That act has such an ability to pull you into the present moment. But if you're goal-based, you're thinking about what's going to happen in 5-10 minutes from now, right?
Exactly. And there's this continual internal dialogue. Am I aroused enough? Are they aroused enough? Are they enjoying it if they're not talking about it? And also, when you're focused on the goal, you cannot fully immerse yourself in the present moment. And so it totally limits the pleasure that you can experience. And so that's the core thing that I work with everybody, is unlearning the goal-based way of doing sex and because with that as well, a whole load of habits and patterns happen. So when you're in the goal-based model of sex, it often means sex where tension builds in the body. It gets hotter and faster. And they're just a couple of the habits, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it can feel great. So I don't want anyone listening to feel there's anything wrong with that. But if that's the only thing you have every day, it's a bit like having pizza for lunch every day. You would get bored. Right.
So do you think like the way that a couple interacts sexually is like a symptom of other things happening? Or do you think a lot of times it can be the driver of other things, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I think a combination of both, because when I start to work with couples, we unpick what's impacting their experience. And so that can be, for example, a lot of women that I work with, then they can be very sort of successful women in their work, haven't learned to fully let go and enjoy their pleasure. They've learned that their pleasure is often about giving to the man, and these messages are still so strong. So there can be the sort of historical messages, lack of education, but also that can be part of power struggles. If there's other dynamics in the relationship, sex can be a way to withhold from the other person. So there can be often numerous things that we're unpicking to find out what's impacting on their ability to connect and enjoy each other.
What are some common themes that you see with either couples or with single women that let's start with couples. What are some common things you see with couples as far as like what you were just talking about, power struggles or different things like that manifest in your work? So
100% things that can come into their sex lives. So for example, might be disagreements over parenting styles or money. All those sort of things can feed into the power struggles that can show up in the bedroom. I think one of the things that couples, a big thing for couples, is assuming that sex should just be natural and easy. And if it's not, then there's something up with them. But actually creating a great sex life, especially after the excitement of the first 6 months, sort of 18 months, takes time and effort, just like it is if you want to create a beautiful garden. It takes time and effort. And so many couples start to feel there's something up with them because it's not easy. And the relief that they feel when we have the conversations around this, like, oh, no wonder it's not easy, because I'm not actually asking for what I want, or I don't know what I want. Sometimes they don't even know that. They just know that it's not working. And usually one couple is the driver of saying, there's got to be something more to this. We've got to sort this out.
Right.
And also just things like assumption patterns. So for example, just the assumption, well, my partner should know what makes me feel good. They should know how to give me pleasure. And those sort of habits creep in. And one of my teachers calls it the bandwidth of familiarity, where they just get comfy with each other.
Right.
And I think that's a big issue as well. So there's just so many patterns that couples get into that can just affect their ability. And also another thing is the myth that it should just all be spontaneous. And if it's not, again, there's something up with them. But, you know, if couples didn't plan to go to work, they wouldn't go. And actually, sometimes for resurrecting their sex life, that's what needs to happen, is to plan it in. Because we're just so busy these days, and it needs to be put in the diary.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it does affect so many other things, right? So what, I guess my next question was like time frame. Like someone comes in to see you, they realize, say one example of what you were just talking about, they are not either aware of what they want, or they're not expressing what they want. And then you help them uncover this. What's, I mean, I know everybody's different, but what's kind of a time frame that you've seen, like, oh, so-and-so comes in and we talk for this much time and they realize this? Like, what are some typical outcomes that you've seen?
So, well, time frames, because there's usually more than that as well. And so time frames, I usually work with couples for around 4 months. So it's around 8 sessions to really unpick all of this. And so that they have the tools to talk about it in a way that feels generative and creates connection rather than distance, that they can navigate some of the icky stuff when it comes up. And they also can have the tools to create great pleasure going forward. And so it might be unraveling dynamics that happen. And so I play a lot of intimacy games with the couples that I work with. So I'll give you an example, because this is very much about how we are in our pleasure and our bodies. To just sit around and talk about it and then go home actually doesn't get to the root of it. But if we can explore it in the sessions together, we can learn so much, and we can really unpick some of the dynamics. So a little exercise I might do with couples is they take turns asking for the type of touch that they would like on their hands. And that alone can be mind-blowing for some of the couples when they realize they don't know how to speak, or they feel awkward asking for what they want, or they are so trying to get it right that it's just not natural when they're giving. You know, there can be all sorts of dynamics that can unpick there. And so those sort of exercises are really, really powerful. And so we work on the sort of, on the different levels, the thoughts, the beliefs that are happening, the feelings, the emotions, and then how to access more pleasure. Because when we're just heading towards orgasms all the time, we experience pleasure in quite a narrow bandwidth. And for everybody, there's always more pleasure that we can experience. So how to feel more, how to enjoy more as well. So lots of different levels.
That's interesting. That's an interesting analogy, like a narrow bandwidth. Because it's like you're almost going in knowing that, okay, this has to happen, then this, then it's like very predictable, right? That is kind of a recipe for boredom, right?
Yes.
It's like you go in with a script. All right,
Yeah.
we're gonna do this, this, and this. And I already know how this movie ends. So
yeah,
good, right?
absolutely. So couples either have what some couples might call like duty sex, where they just show up to tick that box, or they just find ways to avoid it altogether. So, but with the couples I work with, there's just relief of like, oh, there's another way to connect here, and it's not that complicated, but we just don't have the tools for it, and we also don't have the reference points for it. If I want to learn to create certain types of cakes, there's a million videos on YouTube I can watch, different styles, different
recipe
ways.
books.
Yeah. When it comes to sex, what we have is quite limited, and discerning what's quality and what's true out there compared to what's sort of performative. We just don't have access to seeing that. So we pick up references from Sex in the Movies, where the couples rip each other's clothes off in 2 seconds flat, and it's all hot and quick. And for example, a lot of things I do with couples is really helping them to slow down, and it blows their mind, the pleasure that they can experience when they slow down.
Yeah. And like you said, when you were growing up, it's not like the career counselor pulled you aside and said, "Hey, Sarah, here's an option that I think you might be good at." It's like, that this is it's only very recent that we can even talk about this, right? So actually, that's a good segue. Speaking of talking, what's the format of your podcast? Like, what is that like? What do you address? How long are they? How often do you put them out?
So I only launched it 8-9 weeks ago. Actually a little bit longer, and it's called the Sexy Life Podcast, and it's around positive sex intimacy education, but also wanting to broaden it out, because there's other things that impact on our ability to have a really pleasurable life, like our relationship with money, our health, all those sort of things. And I just I have invited some, from my career of doing this for 20 years, met so many incredible people, and I forget that we have mind-blowing conversations that, for everyday people that really are mind-blowing, but to me it's quite ordinary because it's what I do all the time.
Right.
And so I just wanted to capture some of these conversations and put them out there. And so I've been having conversations around orgasms, desire, intimacy, couples, relationships, all sorts of different things. And so they're around an hour each episode, because I want to sort of have time to go deep with them. And they come out every Monday.
Every Monday. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because I've experienced a similar thing to what you were just talking about, but with fitness. It's like I'm talking about fitness and workouts and this muscle, that muscle all day long. And, people are like, "How does this just roll off your tongue so fast?" I'm like, well, it's the 10,000 hour thing. So what have you found? I know you mentioned you were in kind of an abusive relationship in your teens, and that, so you're sort of doing, I guess, therapy maybe on yourself. I don't know if therapy is the right word, but I got into the specific type of fitness that I do because of the same reason. Like, I threw out my back, excuse me. And so now I do core training, right? So I had to figure out my own situation. So do you find that working with people through these things, you're able to get even more crystal clear distinctions? And have you seen that affect your own personal life, your own romantic life? And, because you just have all this, right? All this knowledge, and it keeps coming.
Yeah, it's just an ongoing journey. And I say to people around sex and intimacy, it's lifelong learning, not only the sexual skills, but we don't get taught the skills on how to relate. And most of us aren't raised with, a lot of us are not raised with role models around great intimacy. And we're at a time in history where we've got more choice in human relationships than ever before. And so for me, it's just ongoing learning. And I'm now just, in perimenopause, and, whether it's having children, whether it's stress at work or injuries, you're going to have these different life stages that change how you experience your body, your pleasure, all of these things. So for me, I'm continually learning, refining, and also I'm a human being. I share my journey and my challenges openly as well. So, for example, 2 or 3 years ago, I had a prolapse, which is, when an organ drops. And so for me, it's talking about my real life as well, and the changes that I have, and all I'm learning and picking up all the time is super important. So, yeah.
Right. Do you know of anyone who does the equivalent of what you do for men specifically? Like, if a man was listening to this and they wanted to talk to somebody?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me have a think. Well, I have a friend, Rebecca Lowry. She runs something called the Sexual Alchemy podcast, which is all about men's issues. She works and specializes working with men. And so I think she'd be a good place to start. And there's a year's worth of episodes there on all sorts of different subjects and topics.
Nice. Awesome. That's cool. Yeah, this is a very important, sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. This is a very important discussion, I think. And like we were talking about, this has not been discussed out in the open for very long. And I was just kind of imagining, when I was a kid growing up, and a lot of boys do this, they copy their dads, and I'm sure, a lot of girls copy their moms, but like, you can't copy them on that. You may copy them on like, oh, my parents hug each other, but you're not privy to what's happening in the bedroom. So this is like one of those things that, there's a certain degree of independent exploration as a young adult. And then as we mature, that this is great that you're helping people with this as well, though.
And the independent exploration can be really stunted by interactions with the parents. So, for example, or caregivers. So, for example, pretty much everybody's got stories of growing up, and whether it's they found dad's porn mags, or mum caught them doing something and shouted at them, or they dressed a certain way, or they tried to have a conversation and it was shut down. And so we have all these experiences that on some level tell us that there's something wrong about this, or it's to be done in secret, in shame. All of these messages can really come through strongly, not with everybody, but I see that a heap with my clients. So that's why things take time, because there's unraveling these messages of maybe where we're not fully giving ourselves permission to be a sexual being, or we feel shame about our desires, or asking for what we want, or being seen in a sexual way. And these things can be quite subtle, and how they sort of creep into how we show up for ourselves or our partners.
Right. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of mixed messages, right? Like on one hand, this is like, this leads to life. This literally creates a new human being, right? I have 4 kids, and it's magic, and it came from sex.
Yeah.
Yet on the other hand, it's like dirty, secretive. We don't talk about it, like you said, and it's like, and it is though. There's like a huge disconnect, I think, in that area, right? It's like, who do you believe? Like, where are you getting your influences from? Dad's Playboys in the attic, all that stuff, right? Yeah, it's
absolutely.
So obviously the tide is turning, I would imagine. Like you're doing a podcast, other people who are doing similar work to what you're doing, and there are couples who are, signing up and getting the work done, and figuring this out and how to communicate with each other. What do you see as the future of your industry, or either where you think it is going, or where you think you want it to go, if those are different or the same?
It's really interesting. I've been really pondering this question recently, because you have got the growth in things like AI tech and sex robots and all of these sort of things that, the sort of future, they call it sex tech. Which for me personally is not where I want it to be heading. Because I see so many people struggling to connect with their own bodies. And that's where I feel that the journey is into our own bodies, our own pleasure. And I feel that there's a real, growth of teachers. And many people might have seen Sex, Love and Goop, which was on Netflix. And it was a massive big series that was from Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop crew. And what it did was it showed what is possible for sex and intimacy in different ways. It gave the peek inside that we don't have. And a lot of people in my field got a lot of calls after that series, because so many people don't realize that people like me exist. And so at the moment, for the options are, if I've got any challenges, I maybe go to therapy. But a lot of sex therapy is quite old school. Don't get me wrong, there's some amazing sex therapists out there. But I've also heard so many people where they've been to sex therapists, and it's literally like they've been taught from a book from 30 years ago. And so I feel we're on a sort of tide turning. And for me, it's about really authentic relating and really coming back to what's natural and getting out of the scripts that we've all learnt, and how we can truly find deep connection and pleasure through presence and communication and authenticity and all these sort of things. That's where I'd love to see it heading, because so many people, when they describe their sex lives to me, it breaks my heart. And they think there's something up with them, but actually it's the type of sex they're having and they can't communicate. And as soon as they learn those skills, one of my teachers says, great lovers are made, not born. Everybody can learn this. Some people are naturally really good at it, but others, just like cooking, are naturally good at it. Others people need a recipe book and they'll get there.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting times.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's definitely exciting. You're helping a lot of people in their relationships, and sex is a vital ingredient of that. So Sarah, how do people get in touch with you? Tell us about your podcast again. How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my website is sararosebright.com, and you can go there. There's the links to the podcast is on there, and obviously you can listen to it on all the usual platforms. You can also find out about my work, book a call to chat with me about my work. And with the podcast, it's called the Sexy Life Podcast. Find it via my website, Spotify, Apple, all of those places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Again, this is Health in the Real World. I'm Chris Janke, joined today by Sarah Rose Bright. Sarah, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Health in the Real World show. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below. Visit mycorebalance.com to learn more.